What's going on, Workforce? Brian and Chris here, and today we're talking about everything we want to know about Endwalker Free Media Tour Edition. This is what we're hopefully going to go in and be asking. And so I put the question to you, Chris, like, what do you want to bring? And then, any question and or maybe reasons why you wouldn't ask a specific question. Floor is yours.
So I wouldn't ask anything lore-wise because they, if we're allowed to ask questions, and I would not look for through any portion of however this thing works. Anything tied to hand, land, or PvP, because that's all November 5th. And so, why would they tell us now if they were just going to state it again November 5th? Mm-hmm. And so, we've seen that before at when we went to FanFest and they first revealed Blue Mage, and then they had a fan Q&A, mm-hmm. and they said, ask any questions you want, but don't ask about Blue Mage because we have a designated Blue Mage presentation tomorrow. And then the very first question or the second question was, so I have a question about Blue Mage. And so I wouldn't go in and say hey, you set aside a date on November 5th and you already told us what's on the list. Mm-hmm. Can we talk about that now? Because I think the answer is no. And so what I would like to know is, I want to finish out what they showed us with rotations.
Okay.
There were some phrases they used, such as an additional ability to salted earth, or that, a new closing ability, or based on certain situations, you would have multiple options on Black Mage. And then I also want to look for trends because I want to know what the content is doing. It feels like, based on what they showed, that everybody seems to be gaining more mobility. Yeah. So stacks on things, anti-knockbacks, movement, Scholar for super speedrun mode. And as all of that has happened, my question is, what is going on that we need to be moving that much? And so I just want to know what the total movement is. Am I just imagining that, or does everybody really have that much movement? Because the only content I can think of in Shadowbringers that needed that much movement for a casual player is Delibram.
Right. I would definitely agree with you on the Delibram front in terms of mobility. I think essentially how to kind of answer that, how I would answer that, in this regards of what I see, is that yes, I do see that everything is getting a little bit more mobility when it comes to the play style, right? We've seen it happen slowly over the course of the classes, and I think essentially when you look at the classes numerically, I mean, almost you could scientifically, say, here's the classes that can move, here are the classes that can't. And it doesn't mean you need 100% uptime movement. It just means that in certain fights, you're no matter what going to have that uptime. I actually had a collab with Cole. We were talking about just the healers, and it was a fun video because he theorizes that the increase of movement speed that the Scholar brings is a DPS up by the whole party. It's actually more utility because if you got a lot of melee DPS, that's melee DPS uptime because they can actually get maybe in one more hit and then already still have that. They don't have to have that sprint. They could have used it earlier, so you could theoretically have more melee uptime and then still get out of the mechanics, right? So that's when you look at the Scholar as a total, it's boosting everybody's movement speed, but then also mobility wise, Warrior looks like it's got more movement with the fact that it's not, doesn't have a beast case cost anymore. You also
said there was somebody mentioned that there was a statement that thrown off that was there was just more mobility on Warrior in general, and I don't know if it was only that gap closer change.
Well, you also have the increased distance of the gap closer. You get a lot of people getting Warrior. Well, not just with Warrior, but I'm saying you also have just a general increase of gap closers. You have an increase in terms of that Monk and Sage also have gap closers, but they aren't a damaging. So you could gap close theoretically to a party member.
Didn't they show one on Scholar?
Scholar has the increase in sprint.
And then Astro jumped in, right? Astro pounced in.
They could have, Astro could have pounced.
It was Astro that pounced in.
Yeah.
I feel like everybody was moving, man.
Right. Everybody's got a little bit of moving. And essentially it's Summoner already kind of had that based off of where it's in its rotation. It either was stationary or it was mobile. Red Mage with its dual cast does have a lot of mobility anyway. Black Mage being the least movable of the jobs, but they still have they're moving around the arena kind of aspects. That's actually one of the curious things about Black Mage. I want to get into the skills itself to see if any more adjustments have been made, because they said as a part of the live letter, they're only showing a small amount of the changes, right? So they're going to leave it to us to dive into the nitty gritty. And that's something we talked about in our previous video. But I do think that everything is getting mobile. The question is that will mechanics of the game align to that? Or is this more just bringing people up to kind of par for the most part? We don't need to homogenize the entire movement system, but I don't know. Maybe this is just a little bit of a correction. What do you think?
Yeah, I do wonder if some of those tooltips also do anything else. So like in a release, for example, nullifies most knockback effects, which is the exact same phrasing that's on arm's length.
Mhm.
And so, when we see all this movement, especially like the scholar movement, giving everybody movement, does it do something else, right? Does it give them a defensive buff? Does it give them an offensive buff? Does it give them an anti-knockback? So sometimes what happens is we think of an ability as doing a certain thing. Arm's length also applying not heavy to slow down the enemies, but that slow to slow down the swing speed of everybody around you. So it becomes this defensive in dungeons, but it becomes an anti-knockback in raids and trials. And so does it perform something else in addition to that speed? Because there have been a lot of people, because it got such a short portion of the presentation, which was a 3.5-hour presentation. So like something, God, it can't all be that long. Like it was already really long. But if there is more for scholars, is it in the same tooltips that we already started hearing about? I haven't gone and looked up any of the leaked tooltips that I assume everything he moused over in Japanese, I assume has been reposted and translated somewhere.
It has been.
I have not spent any time looking at that stuff. I have been sprinting to get as many things leveled as possible. So since the media tour, I have capped. I've capped all have capped 3 or 4 jobs within like 7 days of it, 14 days of it.
Now, Panda's asking specifically about our thoughts on the Red Mage as they just hit level 56. But the thing with the Red Mage is that I see them also, we talk about speed, moving into also skills that have more of an AoE aspect as well. So that from a dungeon to like a raid, where in a raid, you're really kind of focusing on one target. Maybe there's an ad phase. In dungeons, you have multiple packs of trash mobs, and seeing that the Red Mage has its AoE rotation really buffed. And beyond the Red Mage, it's like even with Summoner and rest, I'm betting we're also going to see some more in terms of here's my AoE stuff. And then, even with Warrior, the fact that you get your Storm's Eye off of the start of your AoE rotation. This is a huge change. Like I can't even express to everybody.
It was phrased as if I could trigger it off of it. So I'm wondering if I can do 1-2 Storm's Eye. So the first 2 hits would not have it. Right. So I don't picture it being a Nokian where it procs off of my cone. I picture it being cone, circle, Storm's Eye, cone, circle, cone, circle, cone, circle.
And it's very well possible because they made the change where the AoE rotation kept it up, but you had to go with a single target rotation just to get that. And it was so essential that if you're not doing that, you're like missing out on massive amounts of damage. Right. So I'm seeing that as well. So it's kind of exciting to see. I think that's I don't know if that's going to change the content. Now, for me,
imagine cone, circle, and then throw your Storm's Eye up, and then it's gap close, inner release, decimate, gap close, decimate, gap close, decimate, cone, circle, like gap or decimate, cone, circle, cone, circle. Like there's so much AoE there, and like I just listed 3 gap closes. So like at that point, you're at the next wall. Yeah. Like if dungeons are designed anywhere similar to any dungeon we've seen to date, you've already made it to the next wall. So like I think that sounds awesome, and all I can picture is healers going, "What are you doing? Like, slow down."
So last time we were at the media tour, Yoshi P mentioned something about circles. So one of the questions that I would have would be any additional information that he has thought on social changes, right? Because we ended up getting the fellowship system, which if you're using the fellowship system like on a daily basis, not like I check in on the fellowship system every 6 months. Like if you're using the fellowship system, let me know, because my interpretation is, hey, we added fellowships, and everybody's like, oh, this is neat, and then it's like
back to party finder.
Like it's like this is a system that now is just there. And but Yoshi P mentioned this concept of circles, where it's like you come in, it's like you're graduating class, and then over the course of time you're a part of this group, and to see like, oh man, that guy that came in the game and we were part of the adders at this same time, he actually cleared ultimate, to be able to kind of see and find ways of kind of relating people passively, is the gist that I got of it. So he talked about that, over 2 years ago. And I'm curious to see if that he's had time to explore that idea, and just from a development perspective, how he wants to try and address like different ways of social. We talked about it ourselves. Like when I go run a dungeon, I have no idea if I've run that random dungeon with this person, or more specifically, it comes up in alliance raids. If there was a system in which like, oh my gosh, like we're on the same thing, we've run this 100 times together. Do you want to maybe just like team up, because we clearly have the same goals to help facilitate relationships, so for friendships, even if they're loosely based.
Yeah.
Because the thing that I discovered with myself over the course of, I made one change. I said, I'm no longer going to idle at the house. I'm going to idle in Limsa, Gridania, or Ul'dah. I'm just going to hang out there while I wait for content to pop or while I'm figuring out what to do. And I see all the different orange name tags, people who are on my friends list. And I end up getting in these organic conversations. And it is amazing. It's a beautiful aspect of the MMO. The housing system kind of pulled that away from me. And I didn't know that it did until I forced myself to make that change. And thus, this is the same concept with instance content. Like, you know, some kind of way of just like with Yoshi P circle system, like, are we going to see, like, how is he looking at trying to address this as a challenge within MMOs? Because I still see other MMOs trying to address this problem with time. Go ahead.
So it does happen some. I ran 9 Hell's Lids back to back last night.
Yeah.
And it was only across like 3 tanks. So like I just kept getting the same tanks on some of them. And I couldn't quite swear. I was like, I swear that's the same glam. Because I play with initials on. And so I was like, I swear that's the same glam. And so like, how many times during a relic grind do I have to keep syncing up with that person? Where like when you see the same person at the store 2 days in a row, you're like, I think that's the same person. Yeah. But by the 4th or 5th time, you're like, okay, I'm gonna wave. And if they wave back, like maybe that's a new thing we do. There's this stranger that I see at, you know, wherever in the real world every Tuesday, and we wave. And that's what develops that relationship organically over time. WoW Classic and Final Fantasy XI had this.
Yes.
So this is something that has been removed from games.
Yes.
Is not, and is now being manually injected back in when he was theoretically talking about trying to do this. This was extracted through systems such as Duty Finder, and roulettes and all of that, like just in general roulettes and Party Finder, and this ability to kind of crossword link shells and like all these abilities to kind of go either tossed into random anonymous people or to kind of echo chamber yourself off. We gained a lot, but we also lost a lot.
Yeah. It's trying to claw that what we got back. Cause I've talked to a lot of hardcore, Final Fantasy XI players, having been playing Final Fantasy XI on a private server. And a lot of them believe that, 11 is the greatest of all time. And I actually do like have a connection. I do agree with that from an MMO perspective of how MMOs were defined to me, right? Like if it's like, hey, this is the best, piece of bacon you ever had. And then bacon after that is like, well, yeah, I see what they're trying to do, but it's not like this original piece that, was perfection, even if it's nostalgia that built it up in my mind, that first experience, right? So the joke I was going to make about you in the supermarket, though, was like, and that's how Gaming Kinda met Mrs. Gaming Kinda, just slowly building up with awkward waves at the grocery store. It's not true, but that's what I
tripped over me in college. I was asleep. I did an all-nighter, and I had class in a little bit, and she tripped over me. I was asleep on the ground.
Nice.
Still
is today. But to your point, though, it's that there was that social aspect, but we gained so much, and a lot of people see that we've gained, that we've lost so much. And I still think that we can actually gain the things that we lost without taking away the things we've gained through the use of technology and looking at these systems in a holistic way, right? Like, what is it that we actually really lost, and actually going to try and create a system that generates that. That's where Yoshi P Circle system actually sounded very intriguing, because it's just ways of relating groups of people together in ways that you might not necessarily be aware, without having to force you into an uncomfortable position, right? Hey, go be social. Like, I'm really kind of like not feeling social today, as opposed to like, hey, you're doing this other thing. Hey, turns out like we've actually are doing the same thing together, and it would be faster and advantageous for us to team up. And it just invites people to step out if they feel like it. It doesn't punish anybody, but that's how I interpret it. Yeah, I'd love to see an update.
We don't know anything about it. He mentioned it offhand last time as part of a answer to an interview question. I would love to see more about systems. So like the bicolor gemstone was a huge leap forward in Fates. And Mr. Happy asked in an interview back in May that would we see like the skirmish and that system make it into the open world? And TLDR, they just don't have the dev resources to do it. It wasn't that he didn't think it was a good idea, or even that they'd never thought of it. It just wasn't going to happen. That's great. No. So I think that was, I would love to see how are they planning on breathing life into lateral systems. So that's the limited job system. That's crafting and gathering on the 5th. PvP on the 5th, but also things like fates, things like hunts, which I think with the new interest in Aetheryte tickets is going to be intriguing. And, like what else do I do when I'm caught up? People hit the end of a skill and they go, what do I do? And you say, well, you can gear up if you want to. And they're like, do I have to? No. And then they're like, okay, how do I gear up? And it's like, okay, well, there's 10 ways to get a little bit better gear, and then 8 ways to get better gear, and then 6 ways, and then 3 ways. And it keeps working its way up this pyramid. You just climb up to however high up the pyramid you want to go and then stop. And they're like, okay, I'm there. Now what? I don't know. What do you want to do? Like, it really is an open, vast thing. And so how are they going to continue to develop and support those systems? Is there any update on, like, do we get a trust system for Cape Westwind? Do we get a trust system for Praetorium and Castrum?
What's interesting about those, right? Because what's interesting about those is that if they targeted that system to those aspects, it doesn't feel like they have to develop it for the entirety of ARR, Heaven's Word, Stormblood, right? Like, hey, like if you like, not that they shouldn't, I mean, in my opinion, at some point in the future, but more of a focused target of like, here are these pain points that the game has, but we have a system that we can implement for those pain points. Let's solve that problem, and then let's see if the community feels like we want to expand on it any more than that. That's a really good question. I really would be curious to see about that as well.
And then are we going to see anything that moves towards teaching people to be better players? There is this move towards finishers to combos. And that feels like we're going to start rewarding you for actually finishing a combo. Yeah. In a way that's more than just finishing the combo.
Right. It's actually,
we don't allow DPS meters.
Right. It's skills that open up because you did that, right? We saw that with Paladin.
Like this, right? Yeah. Enochian always made Black Mage feel like, my Enochian fell off. Right. That's because you're doing it wrong. On Astro, I only run out of mana if I'm not remembering my cards, because not every other job has that. I'm not remembering to use my cards, and then I can run out of mana. But otherwise, I'm fine. As long as I'm using my cards and lucid dreaming at all, I'm good on mana. And so mana tells me you did it wrong. The ninja has the Mudra system telling me I did it wrong. I don't get as much Fell Cleave on a warrior if I do it wrong. And so, like, are we going to see more things like that? I was really hoping the role quests would move into that, this kind of extension of the Hall of the Novice to help us become better players. The Stone Sky Sea Air is so binary. It leaves so much to be desired as far as like, how do I perform when there's an AoE to dodge? Yeah. How do I get better as a player if I want to? And then if I don't want to, that's fine. Just ignore it. Like, it's no big deal. PvP puts a scoreboard at the end. If you want to close it, just push leave. Yeah.
There's things I want to know about PvP, but I'm going to hold off on that because we do know dates are coming.
Right.
But there are the questions that I have, and maybe the media tour, maybe they'll share some of that and we can ask it. They do. I have questions. Like, one of the things that I would love to see in PvP literally would be let stats persist across my character, because it's only you get those stats at the end, right? Like, I'd love to know, like, in any PvP game, I get all kinds of stats. I get a career, card of like, here's what I'm doing, right? I think for me, the thing that I would like to know the most after, the circles kind of question, social question, would be like macros and what I call stacks. We haven't seen any updates to our macro system ever. And we did end up eventually getting kind of a shared tab. And if anybody knows, they go and look at my streams, I pull up macros. It's like everything is filled up. And I'm not asking for more macros. I'm literally asking for the ability to trade a macro to another player. Like, let me just say, because if you're on PlayStation, you don't, copy and paste. Oh, you don't have that ability because maybe you're playing pure controller. Like, it'd be really cool to be like, oh, trade. Here's this macro that I wrote for you. Bam. Thank you very much. Like, that would be such a nice quality of life. But the other thing is the same kind of concept with macros, less efficient in battle. Would we ever see any kind of updates to address that? Or would, Yoshi P has thoughts on concerns about making the macro system too powerful to kind of take advantage of? But that's where it kind of comes down to the controller player in me and ability stacking. Because we have it for PvP, but I would love to see and get his thoughts on, like, have they thought about it in terms of PvE? What are their pros and cons, for that, just to see if they had, we ran tests. Turns out like it doesn't really fit with the battle system itself, but there's a couple of jobs, and it's not all jobs, but there are a handful of jobs, especially in Storm and Shadowbringers, Paladin specifically, that I was like, it would be really great if I could just be like, stack these 3 abilities to this one button, and then that actually frees up all this other combos. It doesn't mean that it's just one button, because like I would prefer limits on how many abilities could stack up on like one button and just execute one after the other in terms of pressing. But other than that, it's like, there's just like, I just want to be able to get a little bit more comfort, get a little bit more space, and see if they had any quality life plans for us controller players down down the road, or if they're like, yep, we've hit perfection, we're good to go.
I mean, speaking of stats, what kills me in a raid? Seeing what did the final damage. That's something you can do with add-ons that you cannot do without.
Yeah.
And then how is gearing going to change? Right, we're dropping the belt. What happens to materia? We'll have less slots. You'll have less of an ability to pentameld. Do the boots get more powerful? Like there are legitimate questions about what happens to gearing with one less slot, and what happens to the amount of time. Does it take less raid lockouts to get geared because now you need one less thing? You need one less loot drop for your belt. Do we just gear up faster? Or are they going to extend that back out by saying, okay, the belt stats are now moving to boots, and boots are going to cost more by one raid token in normal, and a little bit more tomes and things like that to kind of dial boots up to being a little more valuable or something. There's been a lot of questions. Of course, the meme on it is, the first person to ever think of the joke, well, what about our pants falling down? Because I have this non-cosmetic belt. The belts were cosmetic way back.
1.0.
They went away.
They did.
So what happens there? And I have a couple other questions written down, but I think that's the bulk of conversationally kind of what I'm feeling, what I wish I knew today, pre-Mediator, and I assume a big bulk of that gets answered. And then I have a new round of these questions with all new questions I didn't even name that go for November 5th. And then if it's not answered November 5th, game's live in 2 weeks.
Yeah. All right, time to go. Darcy here, and I'm probably butchering the name, apologize, saying kind of the stack situation, that aren't they implementing that for Gunbreaker? Yeah, in a way, but it doesn't have to be every ability, right? Same thing with like Summoner for Shadowbringers. I was like, there's just a handful of abilities that they're just out there. You can't use them all the time, so they just take up a button spot. You maybe use them once every 180 minutes, but they are a key part of your rotation because they are only activated when A and B and C become true. Like, why not just make that just a natural extension of the C ability? Like, oh, I press C, now I can choose when to activate that next ability, as opposed to like, it just has to live on its own button.
Right. If you could only Confiteor after you've hit Requiescat.
Right.
Why would you, and Requiescat has a cooldown. Why would it not be hit Requiescat, hit it a second time to trigger it? And meanwhile, it has been on the back end tracking a cooldown.
Yeah.
And if you miss its window, it just shows you where you're at in the cooldown.
Boop, boop.
So why would you not just make that one button? Now they're making a change to the Requiescat system in general, so that was just an example.
Yeah.
But if you have a job that has a full rotation
same
for
thing with
AoE
Atonement,
and a full rotation for single target,
Yeah.
you would never start the single target rotation and then pivot to the second ability in the AoE rotation. You would have to start over to go into AoE, and you would do that. So why would the second and third abilities for single target and AoE not be shared? Which sounds like Dancer is moving more towards that
Sounds
system.
like that. Same thing with Summoner, like where certain things are part of this rotation and etc. That rotation, it's like great.
If I know I'm not going to use ability B without ability A, and I know I'm not going to use ability 2 without ability 1, then once I push 1 or 2, or 1 or A, then B or 2 could be one. That's one button.
Yeah. 100%. The that same thing with like Atonement, because it's like you have to do your combo and then Atonement becomes available. It's like, well, okay, I'm kind of limited here. All right, let's do it. So that's what I want to know. I'm sure I'll come up with some additional questions, and so that's kind of where we put it to the community as well. Some things that you want to know that we didn't talk about. If so,
how does that work when you scale it? Yeah, that whole thing falls apart. Everything we just described.
Well, we've you and I've kind of talked about scaling, and that I think that would be kind of an interesting topic with him. But if he's not going to address it, I don't want to burn a question on it, if that makes sense.
I think Monk is starting to address it. I think Chakra becoming available earlier says like, we're aware that identities need to be available earlier.
Yeah, very true. And that's what I said. It's like they either need to fix the scaling system, or they need to shift that stuff earlier so that at least ARR gets to take advantage of something extra, right? Because they used to have other skills there.
Especially for jobs where it's not establishing good habits.
Yeah.
I can understand you having abilities 1 and 2, but not 3. But if it's like, oh, well, you have abilities 1 and 2, don't worry. Next expansion, you move to A and B. What? And so there are jobs that feel like these drastic pivots, and it feels like you're not establishing good habits when you make the mistake of doing synced content. Cool.
What
Lots to
take us
know.
out?
Yeah, that's just us conversationally talking through this. I think I'll have to have a written list. I've already started one on a sheet that I didn't have in front of me for this that is helping me kind of keep organized to make sure that we're learning everything possible. And when the embargo lifts on the media tour, anything that you and I somehow don't figure out through this, I'm sure somebody else will. That's why there are so many unique and different perspectives, and more is better. So maybe next time they can invite 1,000 people. And yeah, best of luck, Ishvi, because he tries to individually.
I hear he's putting on a lot of interviews, so. Ooh.
He gave 37 last time. His last Q&A in game had 43 questions. Like, the man's a legend.
Yeah.
So we will see you guys soon. We will tell you everything we can as soon as we can. But until then, take care.